Hello, listeners. Welcome to my podcast, the Marty Zylstra Too Much Information podcast. I'm really happy you're listening today, and I'm excited to tell you my story. The reason for this podcast is to talk about my history, talk about my musical journey, and show you my catalog and tell you a bit about myself so we can learn to get to know each other and enjoy doing so. I'm really excited to hear from you, and you can keep in contact on socials, and that would be awesome. So, digging in, I want to start out at the very beginning. When it comes to music, my life musically started at the age of 4, and it's going to sound like a ridiculous story, but it may be mythology, it may be true. But what my mom always used to say is that at about the age of 4, she caught me playing a song on the piano, on the family piano, in the living room one Sunday morning at 6 a.m. And it was then and there they decided to put me in piano lessons, and that began my musical journey. I didn't have a choice to do anything else. It was piano or bust, music or bust. It's a good thing or a bad thing because, in one way, my path was chosen for me, and in another way, I didn't really have much choice in the matter. I mean, now looking back, I would have loved to have been involved in other things like sports, but that being said, here we are. And, my family has a bit of musical background. My dad can play music by ear. He can play the accordion, he can play the guitar, he can play a bit of the trumpet, that kind of thing. And so because of those inherent musical abilities, I was, I think, put on this path to create art. And again, as we dig in, it'll kind of make sense to you a little more, dear listener, that, when it comes to music and it comes to your path, sometimes you just fall into it, whether you like it or not, kicking and screaming, and that's kind of where we are. So, small town, rural Manitoba. Picture it, if you will. It's the 80s. I'm about 5 years old, walking down to the piano lesson on whatever day it was, maybe Saturdays. I don't remember, and it doesn't really matter, but think about the 80s in rural Manitoba, what the piano teacher would have been like. I do remember her being wonderful, and I do remember her being kind, and I do remember learning things from her. And it was enough to keep me going as I moved through piano into my preteen years. But then I got into different kinds of music, and I no longer wanted to play piano. To be honest, it was not a fun instrument for me. I didn't naturally excel at it. It's a difficult instrument to get good at. It takes a lot of work. And at that time in my life, being a youth, I didn't particularly want to play piano. I didn't love it, and the music I was learning, I didn't like. And by the time I was 12 or 13, the piano teacher that was available to me was a crotchety old lady in her 80s who would slap me on the hands with a ruler. So at the end of the day, piano wasn't fun for me. I wasn't getting better, and I wanted to move on, but I didn't know it. And I sort of plucked away at my dad's 12-string guitar, which was extremely difficult to play, being a 12-string, and it's grade 9. We're in music class. Back in those days in Ontario, there was a music class, and a couple of kids in my class brought in a tape of a new band from Seattle. And the band from Seattle, everyone knows now, but then they didn't really know anything about, and they were breaking ground. And the moment I heard Nirvana at 13 years old, I didn't understand why I loved it, but it spoke to my heart. And so I did a bit of research, and everybody in our area, I think even every male and female, grabbed a guitar and started to practice and learn and wanted to start a band. And that's exactly what I did. And I think my parents thought at 13, piano hadn't worked, so there was an interest in music, so let's throw an electric guitar into his hands and see what he does. And sure enough, I got an electric guitar, a cherry red Samick, which was like a Yamaha knockoff, which is a Fender knockoff. And I'm not minimizing those guitars, it's just it wasn't a high-end guitar by any stretch of the imagination, and it was about $100, and it was a tiny little amp. And I started moving toward learning songs so that I could write my own songs. I sat in my bedroom for 30 days playing guitar for about an hour a day, and then by the end of it I started a band. And that's actually what happened. In high school, I think it was grade 10, in November, I started a band, a very amateurish band. We had to learn 2 or 3 songs for the talent competition, which was Christmas. And I remember hearkening back to grade 9 at around the same time, the year before, seeing a band of my peers, older kids, play rock and roll music, and I think they had played possibly a Pearl Jam song or possibly another song of that era, Runaway Train by Dave Perner's gang, Soul Asylum from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I believe that's what they had played, and it was so loud and so pure and visceral to me. I'd never seen anything like it, and it blew my mind. I wanted to do it. So there we were. It was November, and we were learning Nirvana songs so that we could get up on stage and impress our friends. But I also just wanted to play my own songs, which I had written. And so I convinced them to play my own. And I started a band, I learned how to play guitar, then I started a band, then I wrote a song, then I taught it to them, and then the rest is, as they say, history. It's not really history, but you hear me. I wanted to write songs right away, which is interesting because that was where my heart was at, always writing and always wanting to develop ideas. So that's unique. I feel it's unique in the sense that I didn't care about learning songs. I only cared about writing songs, even if they were bad. Now, looking back, I wish I'd learned more, maybe practiced more, maybe copied other artists that I love now more to get better at the instrument. But here we are. So moving through high school, I performed, and I got such a great thrill from it. I wanted to keep playing and keep performing, and I did, and I played another couple shows, I believe, in Ontario, tiny little punk shows where you play 1 or 2 songs, maybe 3. And then later in high school, I ended up moving from Ontario to BC, and I had the chance meeting my first ever class in a Western Civilization course in grade 12. I met a lovely, lovely friend, old friend now. At that time, it was our first class. I'd never met him before. His name was Dave. And he said, I didn't bring a pencil to class that day. I don't know why. I think I was the new kid and I was kind of rebellious or feeling rebellious, or maybe I was nervous, or both, or all of the above. But I asked him if I could borrow a pencil. He looked cool. He had long hair. So I sat down next to him and he lent me his pencil, which I then broke in half and threw across my shoulder, saying, "I don't believe in material possessions." That's kind of a famous jokey story that we always used to tell, but the funny thing is we became fast friends, and he turns out he was a musician too, and so we started jamming in his mom's garage, and it was in Deep Cove on Vancouver Island, near Sydney, near Victoria, and we enjoyed writing songs. He told me years later that he thought I was a horrible guitar player, and I agreed with him. I was a horrible guitar player, but we practiced so much that we all got better together, and we had a drummer, and we wrote some songs. And I'm going to play one of those songs for you now. It has potential, but keep in mind that this was recorded on a reel-to-reel with no tricks or magic or compressors or studios. This is a garage recording, and it has some charm, and maybe you'll get something from it. So here we go. This is The Doctor's Lab. A strange name for a band, I know. But here we go. I'm going to play the song for you. You tell me what you think.
Don't know what to expect, 'cause green is not easy to bear. Oh no, my house is on fire. Oh no, my house is on fire. Oh no, our house is on fire. Oh no, our house is on fire.
As you can hear, there's some good ideas in that song. It's amateurish, it's young, it's youthful, it's got some passion. I think that my voice is maybe a little rough, to say the least, but I still get something from it, and it throws me all the way back to when I was 17 years old. You can feel something, and it's nice. It's nice to feel that, feel the memories of that time. You know, music at that time in my life, I wanted to play and play and play, and I think we rehearsed 3 or 4 times a week. And we got really good. We played a few punk shows. We became friends with other rival bands and rival schools, and that was in the end what in the end I met mentors, and I learned from new people, and I got to meet and perform on the same stage as people that became fast friends. And we ended up years later we rehearsed in the same lockout, and shared stories and we shared stages and we grew together as youth, and it was really fun. It was a really fun time in my life, going down to rehearsals, practicing and jamming. And as high school ended, that band, my high school band, disbanded, but we decided to sort of keep the fire alive. And I was about 18 at the time, and a friend, Bill Farrant, and so Dave and I started jamming in this little house he was renting from his dad in Sydney, and we called it the Sugar Shack because it was literally a dump. But at any rate, we cleared out a room, started a rehearsal space, and it was just the three of us. And we had a blast writing songs that were kind of three influences. Bill's influences, which were folk, blues, and groove. My influences, which were pop and rock, and Dave's influences, which were 60s and 70s blues. The band, Dylan, at the time, funk was really big in the 90s, as everybody remembers, bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers or things like that. And we were all growing as artists, as teens, and it was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of beer, to be honest. But we got our first show downtown Victoria at a bar called Harpo's, it was called at the time. I don't know if it's still there. It might be called something else, but I wasn't even 19 yet, so I had to sit in the green room until it was time to go on stage. That was my first memory of being in a club and playing a show. But we had all our friends come out on a Monday night, and we had a blast. We played 5 songs or 6 songs, and the rest is history. You know, music is kind of funny because I hear stories from other people who are maybe younger, in their teens, and who are interested in music, or people who have had some musical background performing. And, you know, that could have been the end of my musical journey, to be honest. That could have been it, and something weird happened. And I'll tell you about that here. But let's listen to my old band, Thunder Sauce, which was post-high school, pre-college. It had the dumbest band name on earth. We were named after some type of hot sauce. I believe it was a band member's dad's imported Australian hot sauce. And we thought we were going to be the next maybe G-Love and the Special Sauce, and then or the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but also with a bit of folk, with a bit of pop, with a bit of Vancouver Island from the 90s at the time, and it was a blast. We played a lot of shows, and we had a really good time. Here you go. This song is called Motive and the Deep Coat Boys. That song, it was around that time, I think, that we'd printed the CD, and we had gone into a real studio to record it. As you can tell, it's got a bit of charm and is really rough around the edges. It sounds like teenagers to me now, but it's still got something. It's got melody, it's got passion, it's even got a story in there, and it repeats the chorus a few times. So I'm proud to say that we were able to still write songs that were memorable. So that makes it more charming it shows more potential than you would think, coming from teenagers, in my opinion. What was interesting about the group and about that CD, we printed the CD, and I'll never forget the day we picked them up, put the CD in my car stereo, turned it on, turned it up, and drove down the street, and it was amazing. It felt so good to hear my own CD on a stereo. And I think we printed 500 CDs or something, and we ended up that day, I think, even selling kind of 20 to 30 of them to our friends for $5, which we thought was amazing. And so we convinced the local pub that usually only had cover bands or bar bands come in and play. We convinced them to have us come in. We said, we'll sell the place out and you'll be blown away. And sure enough, with some arm twisting, the local pub put us on stage. And it was the kind of pub you would go to now where there's pull tabs on the wall and there's kind of the old regulars, maybe a bit older crowd. And typically it would be AC/DC tributes or that type of thing in those days. But we got a gig and we got on stage and we had a lineup down the block for us because we had just so many people in the local area looking for something to do on a Friday night, and it was a blast. We sold many of those CDs and had some regional success in that sense. As time went on, it became evident that having two strong songwriters in the band wasn't going to work out. My musical tastes at the time were growing into Britpop and the Beatles, deep into the Beatles. I fell in love with the Beatles very hard around that time. My sister having shown me who they were and what they were about, discovering the song, specifically the one song Rock and Roll Music, on a documentary in the 90s. And I'll never forget seeing this thing, because I had always thought the Beatles were When I'm 60 full, like your mom's kind of, or dad's or grandparents' music. But then I heard kind of their early cavern sound, which is, a rock and roll band, where you can hear the squeak of the kick drum in the songs and you can hear John Lennon scream. And so I was really drawn to the Beatles at that time, and me being a singer and then the other singer being more a Dylan or a young Dylan or a young Jack Kerouac writer's style, really focused on poetry and focused on street poetry, focused on different styles that were beyond what I was into. I was into pop music. Little did I know, the Beatles being pop music. And so my musical journey and his musical journey shifted. And although we remained friends, I think the end of the band, or the demise of the band, was inevitable, especially as we all moved on through college and we all moved on into our lives. I ended up going to college, and as I started college, the band imploded. And looking back, it's the best thing that ever happened to all of us. I'm sure we'd all agree with that. Although we had a lot of fun and can laugh about some of those gigs we played, many crazy nights. That's where I end the story tonight. Thank you very much for listening, dear listener. I'm really happy to get to know you. My podcast, the Marty Zylstra Too Much Information podcast, we don't have a sponsor, but we hope we do, and we hope you keep listening next week, where we'll tell you about the middle section, the college years of my life, and musical career, musical journey. The purpose of this podcast is to get to today, and we're going to take some time to get there, but I hope you keep listening week by week. Please keep in contact on Instagram at Marty Zylstra Music, Twitter at Marty Zylstra, and on Facebook at Marty Zylstra Music. Thank you very much.